Welcome and good morning to our session, Wolves at Our Doorstep, or more accurately, welcome to the first wolf ever to attend an Aspen Institute session. I am not Charles Duhigg. I am Elliot Gerson. For most of you familiar with traveling to and from Aspen, you won't be shocked to hear that his plane was delayed, but I'm delighted to say that he is here, he's on the ground, and I think I will get the hook before the second portion of this conversation and before all of you get to meet Nashira. So it could be worse. I am not the substitute wolf, I'm just the substitute first moderator. And you know, the topic today could not be more timely. I don't know if any of you've seen, for example, today's Aspen Daily News, which reports on the progress of the movement of the collared wolves through counties in Colorado where they've been introduced from and where they are. One of the wolves apparently is now in Eagle County, which of course is an adjoining county. Charles, I'm not sure because we haven't been able to rehearse who's going to be doing what. We'll be having a discussion with two very distinguished people after Charlie and I leave the stage. I will assume that he will probably say a little bit about each of them. But it is my privilege, and it's actually the second time this week that it's been my privilege to be on a stage with Charles Annenberg Weingarten, who is the founder of Explore.org and the vice president and director of the Annenberg Foundation. As a matter of fact, for those who were in session one, you'll remember we had a panel about dogs and dog longevity. So there is a connection here. In any case, Charles is a very committed, broadly engaged philanthropist with interests from education to human rights, but with a particular passion for environmental causes and animal welfare. Explore.org, which he'll talk a little bit about, is the world's leading live nature cam network. He's also the founder of Dog Bless You. Where's your hat today?
Oh, it's right there. I feel naked without it.
Okay, well, you've got to see these wonderful hats. A leading provider of service dogs and particularly a celebrator, if you will, of the special bond that exists between humans and dogs. So, as a philanthropist, you focused a lot of your efforts for supporting conservation and wildlife preservation. Just why, with all the different paths that the Annenberg Foundation and you could pursue, why that one?
Good question. Riddle. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. It really means a lot to me, knowing there's so much going on, and there is a wolf in the back that I got to meet. And to almost answer that question, when you interact with a wolf, it feels like I just had an X-ray scan of my soul. And it really makes you feel good. Here's a riddle. They used to call me Professor Charlie, and I used to go into classrooms. If you went into any classroom anywhere in the world, anywhere, let's put it at age groups between 2nd grade and 5th, what would you see around the classroom? Drawings of animals that kids have probably never seen. So having done like all these documentaries and different subjects, I realized, wow, especially when we're young, we're so connected to the natural world. Animals are more than animals, they're deities. That's what this wolf is, if you get to interact with it. And so I realized what a great way to bring people together. And so as always, kids being the teachers, that's really what kind of started more of this niche with observing nature in its purest form. And if any of you have time, we have a little showcase. It's called the Zen Den, and it's a lot of our live nature feeds live. And just come and sit, because some of the topics here can be a little, stressful. And the idea of the Zen Den is to escape stress and just reconnect to nature.
I urge all of you to do it if you haven't. I was with a woman yesterday who, I won't mention her name, she might be embarrassed. She came out of Coke with tears in her eyes. She was so moved by those photographs. And he also talks about how it brings people together, and it's something we all share. One of the other themes we had in the conversation the other day was if we could only use something about the power of animals, and in that case particularly dogs, to bring together this incredibly divisive, polarized society. Whatever our ideologies or political parties, we all tend to love dogs. So maybe we'll just have conferences about dogs, and then maybe people can start talking and realize they have a lot more common ground than we might think. So tell us, how did explore.org come about, Charlie?
Well, explore itself is a transitory word. The mantra of explore has always been never stop learning. And then I like to say, never stop learning meets Sesame Street for adults. So I always try to take complicated issues and make them simple, because you take care of what you love, and to break things down. So it first was a documentary TV show. We did about 270 films around the world with the mission of to champion the selfless acts of others, to inspire lifelong learning, and to create a portal into the soul of humanity. And I guess life had a few changes, and we did quite a few things on nature. But even when you watch a nature documentary, shots are edited and manipulated to create a thesis, a statement, to persuade you. And I really wanted to share the natural world in the purest way possible, to allow you to observe it and to allow it to unfold. And at Explore, one thing I'm proud of, if you ever have the time to visit, is purity is our currency. It's a philanthropic organization, so we're not trying to, there's no subscription, there's no membership, there's no advertising. It's simply a community of like-minded individuals who want to make the world a better place. And I welcome anyone here. If you're ever having a bad day, I always like to say, Explore is like a bridge. You're always welcome. And it's just a beautiful community.
So just what are some of the reasons people give you for visiting?
Well, curiosity is always a great driver, a love of nature. It's really amazing. The week before, there was at the Aspen Ideas, it was a big subject on mental health, and the amount of letters we get from people who find nature as healing, especially with elderly or sickly people who don't have the economic means to travel, and the fact that they get to explore the world and also meet like minds really drives people. Yesterday, we invited in some kids, which I thought was really fun, because here at Aspen Ideas, it could be a little bit older, and it was really amazing to watch their reaction. And as to kind of segue it to the wolf, my golden retrievers here on this trip, I don't know if anyone's seen him yet, our golden retriever, his name is Bodie. Bodie and the wolf. So, but what's amazing is the animal touch. The kids just petting and the healing properties of nature. So I think it's escapism, voyeurism, exploration, curiosity, and healing.
So let's move and talk a little bit about wolves.
Yeah,
we had
talk wolves.
We had a chance to meet the guest star a little while ago. So I promise you do not want to leave. And you support the International Wolf Mission, and obviously you feel passionately about not just dogs, but I've seen wolves. Can you just talk a little bit more about whence that comes and why it matters?
Well, sure. First of all, as also the founder of Dog Bless You, I mean, how many people have a pet or a dog? I was just curious in this room. How many people feel really connected to your animal in a way that you can't describe? Are they just pets, or there's something deeper?
Much deeper.
Okay. Well, the wolf is where this story begins. And like I said, and it might have sounded cute, but when this wolf, and I hope he gets to come out and people get to interact, it really is, the wolf has this innate ability to read you, to feel you. I really felt like there was an X-ray on my soul, and I feel very enlightened because of the simple interaction before you walked in. And so it all begins with the wolf. And, one thing, sometimes we call them animals, and how do you feel? And at Explore, when you look at our site, or if you visit the Zen Den, these are natural cathedrals. These are like pearls of the planet, the church in nature. These are very special things. And these animals, these apex predators, to me, they're deities. There's so much you can learn from them. So much humanity can learn. So that's why it starts with the wolf. It's, and people will feel it when this wolf enters.
So Charlie, do you believe that when people have a connection with animals, a special connection with animals, and understand what they are and have a bond there, do you think that necessarily carries over and makes them more compassionate with members of their own species?
Well, let me ask the audience again. If everyone in the world walked around with a golden retriever, what would this planet be like? Funny, but let's be honest. True, it would be a happier place. There is a healing intrinsic nature about our pets and our animals that I don't even think we've tapped the real value of it, because the thinking mind is always intellectualizing, philosophizing. So without question, and a great example was just yesterday with the golden retriever with the students, and they were all lying on the floor, petting them and, writing about them and making drawings, and no one said to do that. And then the day before, we had this woman, Tamar, she's a philosopher and theologist, and she teaches at Yale, and she was talking about the impact of the dogs in the room. And I think we don't often appreciate the answers that are under our nose, the simplicity.
So let's just pivot slightly to what we'll all be pivoting to in a little bit, which is more about wolves, apex predator. We all shared a landscape with wolves, meaning humans, for thousands of years, but it's not been for many, many thousands of years until the last 100, and now in Colorado we'll be sharing landscape with them. But it's controversial, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. Do you think there's something different about our relationship or our attitudes toward wild animals that are not used to human connection, and the fears or others associated? What's different in your mind about what it is like to be in the presence of a wolf in the presence of one of your own dogs?
Well, I've been blessed to have had many nature interactions. And listen, the unknown is always intimidating and a bit scary. But if you shift that fear into curiosity and passion and compassion, it all works out. There's a reason why they're so sacred. So it's normal. I understand with the reintroduction, and I'm going to let the specialist talk about that, but it's a topic I'm quite fascinated with. But it works. And I think we have a tendency to look at the short game, and I think we have to look at the long game here. And over time, it will work, with getting more acclimated to the natural world. But at first, it's natural to be a bit nervous. It'd almost be abnormal not to.
So I can't see Katie now. I need to know whether we're to continue or whether Charles is ready to join us. We are? Great. So you're in for a treat, and I am going to, with Charlie, leave the stage, and we're going to have a wonderful presentation moderated by Charles Duhigg. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
This is so exciting, and thank you, Elliot and Charlie. Elliot actually got this job like 15 minutes before the panel started, so you did an amazing job. Thank you so much. I'm so excited. I'm going to try and keep some of the excitement out of my voice because as you guys will learn, that we should probably stay a little bit calmer today than we normally would be doing gymnastics on a stage. But I'm so pleased to be joined by two amazing folks. Feel free to have a seat. And for all of you, this is really going to be a very, very special experience. and we're hoping we make it a conversation with you. So please think about your comments and your questions, and we will definitely spend some time, the three of us and the wolf dog, getting to know you a little bit. Let me start by thanking both of you for joining us today. Joanna Lambert, you are a professor of wildlife ecology and conservation biology at UC Boulder. I think when we spoke last week, you were in Yellowstone,
I
right?
was indeed, yep.
I imagine finding wolves?
Yep,
Okay.
exactly that.
And you're also the senior science advisor and a board member for the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project.
Indeed,
Which I would
yep.
love to talk a little bit about. Before we do, let me just introduce Kent Weber, who is the co-founder and director of Mission Wolf, and is responsible for the kindness of bringing an animal ambassador to spend some time with us today. And before we bring the animal out, Kent's do a little bit of training with us. Before we do that, I thought it might be good just to talk a little bit about some of the issues that Charlie and Elliot brought up so eloquently. And Joanna, let me start with you. You know, as was alluded to, wolf reintroduction has been something that is both controversial and cheered by the conservation community. Why is wolf reintroduction important?
That's an excellent question, Charles. And first, let me just say hi to everybody. I'm thrilled to be here. I had to bring my good luck hat so I can sit on my hat. But thank you for being here, and thank you just absolutely to the panel. So why reintroduction? I've been working on this initiative for many, many years. It was not a whim. Right? This is derived from the science and all of what we have learned from previous reintroductions of wolves or Canis lupus into Yellowstone and in other areas. And what I found over the years is that we often lose the forest for the trees. Right? Wolves are so absolutely polarizing in so many ways, emotionally, politically, right? Socially, that we often kind of lose sight of what this really is all about. And in any setting that I am in, I'll bring it back to the biodiversity extinction crisis and the things that we can do as conservation biologists and, as the reintroduction into Colorado indicated, as citizen activists and citizen advocates, right? So really, to me, Charles, what this is about is putting back something that used to be here.
And give me a sense, what are the goals? So if we're setting out in like, is it 100 wolves? Is it 1,000 wolves? Is it not a number? How do we think about it?
There is absolutely a number. This was a big part of the consideration in the creation of what we call the Colorado Wolf Plan, the management plan, which was approved by the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission in May of what year is it?
2024?
Thank you. In May of 23, the wolves went back and...
if you've been spending a lot of time in
I know,
Yellowstone,
it's COVID, man, it's COVID. I lost a few years. So that was approved in May, right? And an explicit and very important point of conversation is at what point will gray wolves be downgraded from their endangered status in the state of Colorado and to sort of non-endangered, right? So that number is 150 wolves anywhere in Colorado at a given time.
Interesting.
Or 200 wolves for 2 years.
And how many, before the reintroduction, how many gray wolves are there in Colorado?
0.
Okay.
With the exception of a couple of wolves that came in starting in 2019. Previous to 2019, just a handful, just literally fewer than 5 wolves had made their way from the greater Yellowstone ecosystem into Colorado. They were all killed for one reason or another.
And Kent, you've obviously been thinking and living with this for a long time as an advocate on behalf of wolves. Tell me a little bit, what is the mission of Mission Wolf?
Yeah, it's basically to put ourselves out of business. What I found early is I was a kid in Yellowstone. I used to go up and hang out when the bears would come up. I grew up in northern Idaho, and I hate animals in cages. And one day I came across a wolf that needed a home. Nobody could handle it. I was naive. I was like, okay, if you do it, get a federal license. I went to the federal government, went, I want a wolf permit. And you know what they told me? As soon as I go in the enclosure, They're dominant animals. They're going to go for your jugular, and you're going to have to pin them on their back, bite them on the neck, and make them pee on themselves. And if not, they're going to do that to you. And the first thing I found, everybody we met was horrified of them. And if you're horrified of it and you can't avoid it, you destroy it. So Mission Wolf was created after that good old show, Mission Impossible. How do you get a wolf back in the wild? It seemed absolutely impossible. And what was even more so is, how do you keep a wolf in a cage happy? That seemed absolutely wrong. And so we said, if you're going to be a wolf in a cage, you ought to have a big one. We moved as far away from one thing as we could, people. We gave them a huge enclosure. And instead of running and hiding like you see at a zoo, you guys become the stimulus. And when visitors would show up, the wolves would run up and say hi. And then what I learned, I can talk till I'm blue in the face. I can tell you the wolves don't eat grandmothers, that they don't make pets, and all that good stuff. When people meet one, that's what it really takes to change behavior. So I think some of you guys might remember a guy named Jim Fowler, Mutual of Omaha. I went round and round with him for hours. We got mad at each other. And he's like, Kent, I understand why you don't want wolves in cages. That's very much a problem. But what he learned and what he instilled in me, nobody cares until they touch. And he said, if you want to help wolves, you go take these wolves and you let everybody in the country touch one, and when they touch one, they will actually care enough, and it worked.
Well, okay, so let me ask you why we are in this crisis moment, right? So I grew up in New Mexico. How many folks grew up in a farming community or a farming state or ranch background or have relatives? Okay, about half the crowd. So you know that when you grow up around ranchers, the wolf is often seen as the enemy, right? Because they take calves sometimes. They are seen as part of nature, red in tooth and claw, and really the red in tooth and claw part. Why are we in this moment where wolves are endangered? Joanna?
Yeah, I could speak for hours on that. I'm not sure what you have up on the screen. Are any of my slides
Can you bring up
showing?
Can you bring up the slide? Yep, there we go.
Okay, so I think we've got the first image there. I want to take you back 70,000 years, first of all, which is the length of time that Canis lupus or gray wolves and Homo sapien have shared landscapes in the northern hemisphere. Only up until recently, arguably over the last 100 to 200 years, has that interaction been severed, right? But it's not an accident. You'll recall maybe from years ago in class or whatever, that at about 10,000 years ago is when the world started to change with regards to humans' relationship with the natural world, right? This is about the time that crops started to become domesticated, that people settled down, that we start to get villages and fences and brick walls to keep livestock in and wild animals out. And I would suggest that at about 10,000 years ago, we get this cognitive shift about how we think about the so-called wild. In Western Europe, right? The response to that was something that we call predator control. This took hundreds and hundreds of years in Western Europe, but by the time we get to about 15 or 1600, gray wolves are gone, Eurasian lynx are gone, brown bear, or what we would call here, grizzly bear, are gone. Now, what I'm showing on that slide is that predator control ethic came from Western Europe, right, and landed on the shores of North America when Western European colonizers arrived, right? And lo and behold, all of the things that they had been killing for thousands of years in this idea of protecting livestock behind fences and walls arrived here and pushed its way, this predator control ethic, into the American West, where the abundance of large-bodied apex predators was very high because we have extraordinary habitats and prey abundance.
Can I ask you one thing
it's
about
been
that?
around for a while.
So before there was widespread colonization by Western Europeans, and we had indigenous populations.
Yep.
Did they live very differently with their relationship to predators like wolves and bears?
And so there were regions, certainly in what is now what we call the United States, where indigenous peoples had settled down, but in terms of agriculture. But the vast majority of humans that lived on this continent, right, up until recently, were continuing in what we might call a hunting and gathering lifestyle, right, that relied on the movement of prey species, and we've all seen this depicted in Westerns, right, following bison migration. So yes, a very different relationship.
And let me ask one other question, and Kent, you might have some thoughts on this too. So you've given us an economic answer about why we see wolves as a predator being controlled, but there's also a real emotion, Ken, as you mentioned, right? People are scared of wolves. They see wolf as a symbol of aggression or assertiveness. The lone wolf is used, usually not in a really positive sense, to describe someone. What's going on there? What is it about the national psyche in our history that makes the wolf this emblem that we fear rather than embrace?
Yeah, no, I come from a ranching family. My dad was actually born on the kitchen table. His sister had the covered wagon. Wyoming, they created wagons in. The other side of the family comes from the Badlands of South Dakota. And I grew up in a logging, mining, ranching, extractive industry world. So I understand those worlds really well. And what we started learning is just misinformation. And we saw in Yellowstone, when we worked so hard to get wolves into Yellowstone, the Wyoming group made a roundtable, 20 different people. They all sat down for a couple years. They had headaches, they had arguments. And when they released this story of how they could all get along at the courthouse, do you think the TV cameras were in there? They were outside the courthouse, and they got the most obnoxious rancher and the most obnoxious environmentalist that said the only good one was a dead one. And that is what the public hears, especially the ranching community.
Yeah.
So I had the privilege of taking a wolf into the Idaho Stockmen's Association. We had the feds there. They were getting ready to reintroduce wolves. The state of Idaho was blocking the feds. They wanted nothing to do with it. And now I'm supposed to walk a wolf into a room with 200 arguing men. We had a guy in the front row, and he was the most red-faced, rudest, anti-wolf person you could imagine. When the wolf walked on stage, guess who the wolf went to? They pick out the bully. They pick out the scapegoat. They pick out the valedictorian. Those people are in their peripheral vision. But that wolf went right to this guy, and all of a sudden he's like, oh my gosh. I said, put your hand out. He looked at the eyes. He's like, that thing's intelligent. It's contemplating me. He reached his hand out, started scratching, and all of a sudden he's like, oh my God, these things are amazing. He raised his hand and he started asking, he goes, well, why is it that New Yorkers want to tell us how to live our life? And I'm like, they don't. Have you ever been to New York? He's like, oh no. I said, do you know what it's like to have 11 million neighbors? He's like, what? He only had a few hundred. I said, they will never get out of New York City, but they want to know in their heart to survive it that wilderness still exists. So they're simply telling you, don't make Yellowstone another New York City. And the next thing he said, well, what is it with these people keeping wolves as pets? And I said, well, we've all been taught if you like something, what do you do? Go buy it. 60 years, what have we been telling our kids? Get involved in nature. Started in the 60s environmental movement. And since that time, what have we responded with? Own a piece of the wild. Wolf puppy for sale. Yeah. 3 million wolf dogs in cages. Over 1 million wolves in cages, far more than in the wild. And that was what we started learning, but we found that interaction is what changed things. And all of a sudden, he looked up and I'm like, are you afraid of some wild wolf that's afraid of humans, knows how to catch a deer, or somebody's pet wolf turned loose on your ranch? You know what their answer was. Yeah. So what I found is that personal encounter is what changes everything. Very much like what you were saying, Charlie, about getting people a chance to connect with nature. I've watched this change people's minds everywhere.
Joanna, did you?
Yeah, I did. I love your comments. Yeah. Thank you. And that's an amazing, story there, Ken. One thing I wanted to leap onto is that, like all vertebrate species, we are wired for fear. This is a really basal adaptation. It is appropriate in settings to have a fight or flight response of that which we do not know, right? If you're entering into a new area and you don't know what the scene is all about, you can't be just laissez-faire, right? That amygdala, that fight or flight kicks in, and that is what happens when it is an unknown, right? We have not lived with wolves in Colorado since the 40s and throughout the 20th century for the most part. And so in the absence of the habituation to something, in the absence of the knowledge of something, what kicks in? It's fight or flight, right?
Okay, so I want to continue this conversation, but before we do, I want to tell all you folks what's going to happen. So Kent's going to give us a little bit of instruction on how to behave when the wolf comes into the room. And please listen closely. I think in general it's about not no big movements, but I'll let him instruct us. At that point, Kent and a couple of his colleagues are going to bring out the wolf dog. We'll go ahead and let it acclimate for a little bit, and Joanna, I'd love to continue the conversation
Absolutely.
with you. And then once that happens, hopefully the animal will stay in the room. We'll come up on the stage. We'll continue the conversation and take questions from all of you. But so with that, Kent, let me hand it over to you. Tell us what we need to know before the ambassador comes out.
So, this is just nothing more than a good example why you shouldn't have a wolf in a room on a leash with a bunch of people. But again, we've learned that nobody understands it till you experience it. And so that's why we called it education versus extinction. And we're not just talking wolves. So what I did is I don't like training animals. I never liked watching people do that. So the idea was, let's get this wolf and give it a big place, give it as natural a habitat as possible. And then what we found is the biggest stimulus was meeting people. It actually made the wolves happy. A lot of people would never believe that. And I watched a wolf walk into a room of 1,000 people. We're at the Smithsonian. And as soon as we walk in, what do you think a wolf would do walking into 1,000 people? Scared. Well, if you walked on stage and we had 1,000 people here and Joanna got up and smiled and you guys all went, oh, she would smile again. The wolf actually started wagging its tail and it started working the audience. So today, this is a new experience for our friend Nashira. She was born in North Dakota, and you got people that know it's illegal to sell a wolf. So you know what they do? They lie. They call it a dog, and they try to sell you a wolf as a dog. They can't prove the difference in DNA clearly. So in the court of law, it doesn't stand up. Now we have people selling dogs. Guess what they call them? Wolves. And now we got people that think they got a great wolf as a pet. It plays with the kids, sleeps in the house, rides in the car, and you see it and you go, well, I want one of those.
I have a golden doodle wolf at home.
Yeah.
Really,
and that's what we
incredibly
tell people.
ferocious.
So the next thing we started working is I've worked around a lot of horses. And if you learn horsemanship, natural horsemanship, I grew up in that world where if you can't hold on to the horse, you're not a good horseman. It's not that way it's supposed to be. So we learned to bond, and what we've now learned, and my wife wrote a book about this, comparing wolf and horse behavior. So what we do at Mission Wolf, and if I had time to do this, I would give you a 5-step behavior program. It takes 20 minutes. First thing is intent shows leadership. We watch these little kids walk in with wolves, and the wolves just lay their ears back and look at these kids like they're giant wolves. How do you get a little kid to dominate a wolf? You walk in, intent, head up. Wild animals are always in their peripheral vision. Today, you've got a society that we don't like each other anymore. What do? Going down the street, we hide our eye contact. Now you got technology bringing our head down. Now you got people jogging through Colorado with their headphones in, wondering why they got a coyote chasing them. And what we're trying to show people is to get around animals, it takes a peripheral view. A lot of us guys...
So step one, I just want to make sure we have enough time to before the animal comes out. So step one is we want to...
So it's just, let me show you. A lot of us guys are focused, and we walk around focused behavior. I grew up hunting, work a dangerous job. That scares wildlife. A lot of girls can get the wolves to come up to them easier. They're in that maternal peripheral vision. Watch the kid, watch the predator. What we learned about wolves, you can see 180 degrees. A wolf sees 270, and they're always in their peripheral. So the first thing we do, if they come up to you, if you lean your head over them, that's going to scare them. Reach your hand underneath and come up underneath them. That's the way to treat anybody. So if they come up and they look at you, and we did this earlier for a test, they walked up to one of the people and they just looked at the wolf. And the wolf just looked at the person. And they looked at the wolf, and the wolf looked at the person, the wolf walked away. Do you guys want to meet one? Yeah. When she comes up to you, don't hesitate to look right at her eyes. That's how they talk. Don't do this in the wild. Don't do it with a dog. But if she comes up to look at you and you don't look at her, she won't say hi. So we look right at her eyes. If she comes up to say hi, use your hand. If you get your fingers down, Joanne, and those animals. Soon as the wolf came up to her, what did she do? She just reached out and she starts rubbing the wolf, and the wolf's like, oh. So if she's afraid, she's not going to be forced to do this. She's not trained. We train you guys. If she doesn't want to come in, she doesn't have to. If she does and she's scared, her tail will be tucked. If she's not afraid, her tail will be straight. And if she thinks this is fun at any point, you'll see her start wagging her tail. We're going to let the leash go limp and let her walk around. And if she comes up and says hi, we just want you to reach out, say hi. If she tries to jump on your tables, she might. Try to not let the water bottles fall off the table. That's the only thing I would ask. But we're going to try to see if she'll walk around. And some of the things I want to show you is that larger head. A wolf has a much larger brain than a dog the same size, incredibly intelligent. And they can look right through us. But I think we're probably ready.
Should we do it? Okay. So just to please don't stand up. That's the one thing. And we are going to take some questions. The mic runner will walk to you, bring you the microphone. But please feel free to.
Yeah, movement is how animals communicate. So all it takes is one person to jump up. It's like if she's coming up to say hi to somebody, and just as she comes up, somebody jumps up to take a picture. That movement means you don't get the greeting, they don't get the picture. We've talked with all the photographers, and I think we're set.
Let me ask one question. Is there anyone who does not want the animal near them? Okay, good. That's great to hear. Okay.
That's good. It's a little late now.
Yeah, I was gonna say. It's and you probably came to the wrong panel if that's what you're looking for.
So I kind of will tell you some of the behaviors, because we can't get it all out, but intent shows leadership. So do that everywhere you go. To diffuse conflict, our world needs a lesson in this. Girls or masters, to ignore diffuses it. This is Moira. She's our lead animal caretaker. She's befriended most of the wolves. This is Nashira. And this is Mike Gardy. He's one of our staff that's been running the refuge as our general manager for over a decade. Very dedicated. Moira has some of her own animals herself. And did you see she's not afraid of us? So we're going to try to let that leash go soft. We call it a soft leash. If any of you guys take your dog for a walk and your dog's dragging you down the street, it's because you got too much pressure on it. But we're going to see whenever Mike wants her to go somewhere, he'll give her a little tension. Hold on. When she reassesses, he releases. That's one of the biggest lessons in working with dogs. So as she comes around, you guys start praising on her and talking to her, and you'll start seeing she'll start working the audience.
She's beautiful. It's just a beautiful animal.
She's not stressed, and you guys all know this. All the beautiful calendars are done with wolves in their winter fur coats. Would you ever buy a calendar with a scrawny wolf on the cover? She just dumped all her fur. Yeah. If you guys would have seen her just a month and a half ago, she looked twice the size, so luxurious, everybody goes, oh, she's so beautiful. And yet when you see her at this stage, she just jumped out all of her fur. She's got a little bit left on her back. She looks really thin and kind of scraggly right now, and she just turned 7 years old. If she were in the wild, do you know what that means? End of her life. Huh. But because she's in captivity, she gets fed all the time. She gets veterinary care. And right now we have 18 animals. 9 of them are 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
So when you give an animal a good space like that, they get natural food. We're seeing them live 16, 17, 18 years. But in the wild, it's a rough job to get just
Can I ask a question for both of you guys?
Yeah.
I know that, Joanna, you study this as well. So many people in this room have dogs at home. What is the difference between this wolf and wolves in general and dogs? Because one is a descendant of the other, right?
Yeah, and I teach a course at University of Colorado called Dogs, Wolves, and Human Evolution, and I think it's really important to understand that the process of the domestication of wolves into dogs started over 35,000 years ago. And so this has been a long, long process. There are genetic differences. There are behaviors behavioral differences as well. Our species is truly co-evolved with wolves and domesticated dogs. Our communication with dogs involves our voice, our communication involves our eyes. There, as Kent has been describing, some of those communication tools that we use with our dogs, such as pointing, don't work so well with wolves, right? That kind of signaling that we're doing with our eyes and with our voice and with our hands, right, is something that took place over the last 20 to 30,000 years ago as Canis lupus familiaris derived from wild Canis lupus. So in terms of their relationship, they are the same genus, the same species, a different what we would call subspecies. In other words, a really, really specialized, domesticated version of its wild counterpart.
Hi. Ken, from a behavioral perspective, if somebody had a wolf as a pet versus a dog as a pet, what would be different?
Yeah, I think I can put in a really simple answer, and this is one of the things that I think is really important to bring out. I learned after we started taking wolves around the country, most of the country do not like scientists. I'm a scientist.
True.
I grew
I
grew up doing that.
It's
And that's
wolves
what
and
I
then
found
scientists who are going to...
This is how the public thinks of scientists. We as a scientist know things you don't know. You don't know the words that I know, so you can't possibly understand what I understand because you're not a scientist, and it belittles them. So what we started learning is putting good science in common sense. And bottom line, the difference of a wolf and a dog is one thing. Wild is free and independent. Dogs are subservient. They want to please you. And believe me, when I first started this, I would go to a school and I would tell kids that little chihuahuas came from foxes. I told them that middle dogs came from coyotes and big dogs come from wolves, because that's what science told me. But then you know what science did? They changed it. They learned about DNA. So basically the bottom line is a wolf created a chihuahua. And do you think a wolf turned itself into a chihuahua? Humans did it. Only species we've ever done this to. The sad part is we taught dogs to attack dogs, so dogs are much more aggressive. Dogs send a person to the hospital every 30 seconds. Dogs kill a person in the US every 3 weeks. Wolves don't. But when you mix a wolf and a dog, they want it to look like a wolf and act like a dog. And some people can handle wild animals, but most people can't handle children, to be honest. We kill 30,000 dogs a week. So I think the difference I see is independence. Your dog wants to make you happy. She has no interest in making us happy. She'll cooperate, and this is where we've learned to talk with body talk. So we do mimicry, it stops motion. Mirroring builds trust. And play with wild animals. There's no winner or loser when animals play. And today in our society, every time a child plays, what do they try to do? One thing: win. And if they're not a winner, what are they? A loser. And if you're a loser at 2 and at 4 and at 6, you stop growing. So we're working with a psychologist that works with wolves, Dr. Klinghammer, 45 years ago, and he learned how to work with autistic kids working with wolves. And it's just phenomenal, but it's the touch that makes a difference.
I will say, my dog does not care whether she makes me happy. My wife, on the other hand, she cares deeply about and considers me like a competitor to her affections. Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to go to questions from the audience and your comments and your thoughts and your questions. Before I do, let me ask one other thing. Joanna, you had mentioned this biodiversity extinction crisis, right? And I know, one of my colleagues at the New York Times has written eloquently about the fact that we're in the 6th extinction. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that. Like, what is happening right now in the world?
I think this is a particularly poignant map. What you're looking at here is in the green, the kind of army green, is the historic distribution of gray wolves when European settlers arrived 400-ish years ago. There were upwards of 2 million, it's estimated, gray wolves on the continent. By the time that we get to the mid-60s, there are 300 breeding pairs, it's estimated, of gray wolves in the United States, in the sort of constrained to the upper Midwest, right? And this is not just a story about gray wolves, right? This is a story of what we are doing to species globally, right? So, we've lost 40% of our biomass of insects. There are 3 billion fewer birds now in North America than there were in 1970. It used to be loud in the morning. Older folks like me will remember when it was loud from bird call in the 70s. It's not like that anymore. We are poised at the brink of losing upwards of 1 million species in the next 10 to 20 years. These are not just sort of, random estimates, right? This is the consensus at a global level of specialists that are working on these issues. What the continuing element of this map, after you look at the army green of the previous distribution, is the potential habitat of gray wolves, meaning we know that it has good prey, it has a good sort of landscape suitable for gray wolves, and then in the yellow or orange or sienna or whatever that color is, we have the current distribution of gray wolves, right? Where we have in the upper Midwest, that is that population that persisted. The yellow color in the northern Rockies is a result of the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone in central Idaho in 95 and 96, right? And then at the bottom in New Mexico and Arizona, we have the reintroduction of Mexican gray wolves. And then what you're looking at with that red line between is that the goal of the Colorado wolf reintroduction was to link up those two populations, the northern Rockies and then the southern region, or the Mexican gray wolf, contiguously, right? So that we can begin to get back some of what we have lost. Again, this is not a whim. We are losing apex predators. If you think about food webs and the way that they interact, right? The product of literally hundreds of millions of years. And if you recall that, how food webs work, what's at the top, those apex predators? It's those species that we have lost the most of. And so those are some of the pieces of, and we've got an apex predator walking around.
We're getting upstage,
Totally.
which is totally fine. It's totally fine to pay attention to.
We've been called, so that lovely, lovely being right there, that quadruped in the room, an apex predator, we've been called a hyper apex predator, a super apex predator, because what we're doing is killing and removing the apex predators like gray wolves and grizzly.
So let me go to questions. Let me ask, if you have a question, go ahead and slowly or calmly raise your hand. And then who's got the microphone? Okay, we got one right over here. Why don't we this gentleman here, sure.
Hi, thank you. This is so cool. With the wolves that were reintroduced into Colorado, one of them was reportedly killed by a mountain lion. How does that interaction, or how do those interactions in the wild really go?
Gosh, I'm so sorry. I can't even see where the question is.
Right over here.
Next. Oh, hi. Hi, sorry. I'm blinded by the lights, man. Yes, you're absolutely right. One of the kills, and initially, it was unknown, but Colorado Parks and Wildlife did their, due diligence, did excellent forensics, brought in wildlife forensics specialists, and indeed that is what ultimately was concluded. That kind of interaction is very, very rare. Right? Very rare. It is my estimation, I'm absolutely speculating. I have no way of testing this. But the reality is that species become naive, right? Mountain lions have not interacted with gray wolves for decades and decades. They have interacted with domesticated dogs. My estimation is that was probably a young, dispersing, probably male mountain lion that encountered a dog-like thing, right? A dog-like thing that was actually a wolf and not with a pack, and attacked it like it was a dog. And we do indeed call animals naive when they haven't been around other species. So that's my assessment of that.
Go ahead. Let's go to this gentleman in the blue, and then this woman in the green, if you don't mind.
Thank you all very much. I've gotten to know and actually work with a lot of ranchers in Colorado, okay? And I know a lot of elk hunters also, and none of them are happy about this. How do you suggest members of a group like this, or when we interact with them, how do we communicate with them to kind of ease that concern, or just kind of understand that better and understand what their issues are and what you're trying to bring to them?
And can I ask something? When you're talking to those folks, how are they explaining their dislike? What are they saying?
Well, it's like you said, it's something new. They don't know. They fear the cattle. They fear the decimation of elk herds from the wolves coming in. So it's a fear and an unknown. So frankly, I have no idea how to communicate with them because it's new to me also.
Yeah, and I would argue science doesn't work in that setting. Right, to Kent's point, science doesn't work. Data, you could come up with 1 million statistics of the likelihood of a head of cattle being taken by a wolf, and it doesn't matter. I think getting back to the fear part of it is engaging with empathy and compassion, recognizing that we all have fear for any number of elements, and also just showing up. Right, and I have indeed been the victim of a lot of vitriolic interactions, right? And just showing up is the single best thing that I have found. That building that trust, right, so that you can start to engage and recognize the humanity of all of this is an important first step.
Hi, sweets.
Ken, what are your thoughts? I imagine you have a lot of these conversations.
This all comes down to common sense education. So working as a rancher, and I have a lot of ranching family, I think that helps a little bit. But the main thing is compassion and empathy for the individual you're talking with, not coming out defensive. And then that's what I found when I walked in with the Idaho ranchers. I was like, my job is to keep you guys in business. So I think that's one of the first things is we're not here to put you out of business. With the elk hunters, it is so simple. You can show a hunter that if you have a wolf in the environment, you're gonna have a stronger elk, a bigger elk, a healthier elk, and more elk. The media has misinformed so many of these ranchers with the information. But if you go up to Yellowstone and the environment, I know Joanna knows far more about this than I do, the elk had to disperse. So here's what we say the wolves do, and I think it helps answers this. Wolves will definitely eat a cow or any livestock. That's one of their biggest threats. But coyotes are actually worse. And wolves are afraid of humans. So wolves kill coyotes. And up in Montana, there was a time period, because the wolves had killed so many coyotes, they didn't lose as many sheep to depredation. We never saw this coming. But what we're starting to learn is if a wolf is in a forest, the first thing it does, it makes an elk run. A bear can't do it, a mountain lion can't, a coyote can't. When the elk run, they aerate the ground, they disperse so they don't spread disease, and the next thing they found, the guys searching the trees, took them 5 years to figure out that the trees started growing. They had been watching the trees decline for over 40 years. And all of a sudden, one year, the tree's 3 foot. The next year, it's 6 foot. It took them 5 years to go, why did the trees grow? And you know what they found the answer was? Wolves make elk do one thing, run. And when the elk ran, the trees came back, the birds came back, the willows returned, the beaver returned. Now the wolves are killing the elk. And what we're finding is most of the ranchers know that their problem is when they're out. And I can't, there's a lot I want to say because I just had a call this morning from a rancher who just had a cow go down. They want us to come get the cow, get it off the ranch so they don't have problems with predators. The valley I live in, all mom and pa ranches. The problem is the corporate rancher. And that's what we're finding in all of our world. It's the corporate rancher that's putting the mom and pa out of business. So I find most of the family ranchers aren't as upset. I find it's the corporate rancher that are really putting the big guns towards it.
Let's get, ma'am, you had a question, and then we'll go over to this side of the room to...
Size, is that the typical size of a wolf? What's their weight range?
Yeah. Good question. A lot of people think wolves are so big and bad. Do you guys want to take a guess? What do you think she weighs? Anybody? Just throw it out. I'm hearing 70, 90, 100. You guys are really weird. I kid you not. Everywhere I go, average guess, 150 to 200 pounds. Everybody thinks they're so big and bad. She's probably about 80 pounds. So average size for a female gray wolf. Males are about 100. The farther north you go, if you're up in the Arctic, eat musk oxen. You better be big. If you go to the deserts of Mexico, they eat little deer. They're tiny. So those are all called gray wolves. They're white in the Arctic, cream in the tundra, black in the forest, yellow in the desert, but we all know them as gray wolves. And the one thing the gray wolf does that no other animal does, they make animals run. So I think the hunters can understand that wolves will give them a better hunt. And I think ranchers, for the most part, if they protect their livestock, I've got a family out there that they know when their cows are giving birth, they bring their cows into the field. Corporate ranchers can't do that. And the ranchers that have 500, 800 cows and more, which there's a lot of in Colorado, they're the ones that are having a problem with this.
Let's where's do you mind bringing the microphone over to the other side? Oh, you got one. Great. Oh, perfect. Sir, this gentleman here.
Thank you all for being here. This is really amazing. From Northern California, Siskiyou County, and so I've been able to witness, OR7 coming down in 2014, and I think there's 5 packs in California now, which is really exciting. Stemming from the question you answered earlier, can you speak to the efficacy of some of these livestock compensation policies and the money being set aside? I mean, is it really addressing the problem right on? My understanding, and this might be conjecture, is that you haven't seen the killings associated with livestock that are proportionate to the amount of funds being set aside. And then I think, an added layer to that is some of these traditional prey that the wolves would be relying on in places where they're being reintroduced, be it elk, be it mule deer, whatever. Those numbers are also dwindling. So I'm just trying to understand better.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And Jonah, why don't you just explain what the compensation like here in Colorado is?
And there's a lot of really awesome content in that question, and thank you for that. The first part is that there are, in fact, more elk in the Northern Rockies post-wolf reintroduction, right? Last year in 2023, there were only 23 head of cattle taken from Montana. Right. So, again, the statistics are innumerable. 0.001% of all the cattle in the American West will ever encounter a wolf, right? But those numbers are, sort of meaningless. They don't mean a whole lot to folks. Now, the compensation package that we have in Colorado, and this was a huge point of discussion, is arguably the most generous compensation package I have seen. I've worked around the world in predator-prey conflict and wildlife ecology. I have never seen a more generous one. Right? It is up to $15,000 per head of livestock and per working dog, right? Whether or not that rancher or the livestock producer will get that is a function of what the value of that individual animal is deemed as. It depends on how grown up they are, essentially. But the thing with compensation, right, it's a two-way piece, right? And we have innumerable tools that have been tested, tried and true tools of how to keep predators out of livestock, right? We call these non-lethal measures facilitating coexistence of livestock and predators in working landscapes. So that's a really, really critical part of it, and a huge part of what is going on right now in Western Colorado, because folks here haven't had to deal with wolves getting into their cattle up until December 18th of 2023, when we put them back in. Right? And so what Colorado Parks and Wildlife is doing, what USDA, what innumerable nonprofits like the one I'm associated with, Rocky Mountain Wolf Project, are doing, is distributing information, knowledge, and trainings as to how to keep wolves out of your livestock.
Let's go to another question. Yes, sir, right here in the white jacket. The mic runner's coming over.
This is an amazing experience. Thank you. I'm trying to kind of picture in my head or understand sort of the behavior patterns patterns of a wolf in the wild versus what we're seeing with our animal ambassador. Since Nashira has been in human care for most of her life, would you say that she's farther along the spectrum toward domesticated? Where would you say she falls between a domesticated?
Can I just jump in? Because so domestication is different than taming.
Yeah.
Right? So domestication is an evolutionary process that takes hundreds of generations. So what we're talking about is taming, right? A domesticated wolf is a dog, right? So, and I'll let Kent speak to the differences. I could talk a lot about both dogs and wolves. I spend a lot of time studying wolf biology, right? And I commented on some of the interactions and communication differences between dogs and wolves as a function of that 30,000 plus year of evolutionary history. But yeah.
Yeah, no, Joanna just nailed it. A lot of people think that she's a domestic wolf. She's not. She's not a wild wolf. She can't survive in the wild. She's certainly not domestic. She doesn't do what we want. And even though your dog doesn't do what you want, dogs do a lot better at that. So where she's at in that process, I really don't know all of her background, but I think she's 3 or 4 generations, if not more, removed from the wild. And what people would think is if you breed a wolf and a dog together, you get a half wolf, half dog. Well, you do, but the personality is not anything indicative of the parents. It's just like 2 kids. One kid's an introvert, one's an extrovert. So I know of pure wolves that are so tame and so social that they would probably live in some houses. And I know a lot of dogs that are not compatible with humans. So the bottom line, to say that a wolf and a dog are different, what I think we're trying to get back to, and I want to try to bring this back to what Charlie first started, is healing. This is what we saw. And when I got to meet Jim Fowler and we went out, this is 30 years ago, we're working to get wolves in Yellowstone. What we learned is people that met a wolf ambassador back in the 60s, they're now 90 years old. And they're telling me about the day they met the wolf. A guy named John Harris took wolves to Congress to help create the Endangered Species Act. People that met that wolf, they can replay it like it's yesterday. And then the autistic doctor that I told you about that studied with wolves, he's learned how working with people with autism through touch with animals is healing. And Charlie, what you were saying about the healing capacity of animals, that's why we do this. So we now at Mission Wolf work with a lot of therapy groups, a lot of programs. I get a lot of PTSD veterans that trust nobody. You walk them in with a wolf, and the second that animal's in their face, you all of a sudden see them light up, they start going, they start laughing, they lose their stress. We've watched people with autism meet a wolf, and all of a sudden it just snaps them, and it opens up a new neurotransmitter, is what the doctors think. So I think the healing capacity of people interacting with nature is the only thing that's going to solve this future plan of mass by extinction.
If you don't mind going to this woman in the cap right here. I'm not sure where our mics are.
There we go.
Come on over. And then raise your hand if you had another question. And we can come over here.
Hi there. I actually have 2 quickly. You mentioned the compensation for Colorado. Is there an end date for that, or is that ongoing forever and ever, or how does that work?
Oh, it's a good question.
Yeah.
So huge. Man, you just got into the belly of the beast of the conversations that are going on right now. And what I mean by that is at the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission meetings, you know, the actual state wildlife agency, et cetera. Right now, one of the points of contention is what is chronic depredation? Because absolutely, a rancher, if he or she sees a wolf in the act of taking a head of cattle or whatever, they do in the act, right, like taking, they do have that wolf can be taken out lethally, right? So, but then the question of what is chronic depredation, because you may not see an individual animal taking a head of cattle, but you may keep losing them. Right? And so at a certain point, that becomes what is now called kind of chronic depredation. But to your point, where do we how do we do that, right? Is it that some, a head of cattle has to be taken once a week for the next year, or is it once a year for the next 3 years? It is, in fact, complicated. The other part of it is the assessment of what a wolf is actually doing. Anybody that's gone to Yellowstone and had the delight of watching wild wolves knows that wild wolves will walk through herds of bison, they'll walk alongside elk, and we call this kind of testing. They're assessing their prey, right? This is something that even though they're coursing predators and eventually hunt by running, they're assessing the behavior and the wellness or the disease status of those animals. So wolves will walk by other species all the time, right? And what a lethal removal of an animal can not only be a function, or as it's currently understood, not only be a function of actually seeing a wolf take down a head of cattle, but is also harassing. So is it harassing if a wolf is just walking by? Right? It's a very complicated.
You said you had a second one. Let's make it real short just because I want to ask, give
You
other people a chance.
mentioned that we were depleting the species of birds. Do you attribute that more to human population growth and sprawl, or do you...
Habitat loss. Arguably, around the world, why we're losing fauna is a function of habitat loss.
And I think we have time for just a few more questions. Sir?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about how this conversation has evolved in places where wolves have been reintroduced.
Oh, good question.
I know that Idaho refused basically to give Colorado wolves because they didn't want reintroduction to occur in other places. So I'm wondering how you've experienced that conversation changing.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time in Yellowstone. I've got a big, and around the American West, I've got a big project looking at interactions of coyotes and gray wolves in human-dominated landscapes. And in talking to folks around Yellowstone, those wolves went in 30 years ago. And as Kent has attested to, it was intense. It was vitriolic. Now, when you talk to ranchers right outside the park, say up in Paradise Valley, right? They're like, wolves, schmolves, I don't want them here, and those, you guys put them in here. But, I figured it out. It's a function of habituation. Now the concern in the conversations is about grizzly, because grizzly populations are on the rise.
Yeah. And I'd like to add to that, we found that with the wolves coming back into Montana in 1982, took years of a natural recolonizing wolf to get a pack. And as soon as the locals caught on, they flipped out. They wanted to go shoot them. And what we found, this was with Mike Jimenez, he's like, I don't care what rules you put. I don't care how you do it. I don't care what education. Humans are going to kill wolves. So when they bred the Mexican wolf, and we started with just, like 7 or 8 of them, and we got to 100, and they reintroduced the first 11, people killed 7 the first week. Yeah. So right now, I think this is what we've been telling people, is as soon as you reintroduce an animal in a reintroduction, anticipate that we're going to watch half that population be killed by humans unfairly. But the half that survives will produce pups. And as you guys know, we now have a pup. And then we found that as soon as we got the wolves on the ground in education, we backed out for 5 years. Because once that political thing hits, people don't know what to expect. They get very volatile, and the media would just be our worst enemy. So after the wolves were on the ground about 5 years, we started going back in around the Yellowstone, Montana, Idaho area, teaching people how to coexist. And just like Joanna was saying, at first they're mad. They don't like politicians. They can't shoot the politicians, so guess who they're shooting? You know it. And once they lived on the ground with them, they also went, gee, the kids are still on the bus, the cows are still in the field, the deer are still in the forest, and there's people giving us money because they want to hear a wolf howl. That was one thing that really came about.
Yeah, so we have about 10 minutes left,
okay.
And I know that you thought there might be an opportunity to do a howl with the wolf. Should we go ahead and do that now?
Yeah, what do you guys think? Do you want to try to get a wolf to howl? Now, this can go south many ways. We started finding...
Come on.
When they got the first few wolves in Yellowstone, we're trying to monitor them, right? That's really hard to do. And digital recordings, the wild wolves wouldn't howl with, but we could take individual people out and you can howl, and you can usually get a wild wolf to howl back. So we did this yesterday with her up at our sanctuary. We had a bunch of kids. The benefit I had is we were at her sanctuary, and as soon as we started howling, guess what the other wolves did? Started howling. She started howling. And I had one staff that he lived with us for 5 years. Every time he would howl, guess what the wolves would do? Fight with each other. We had to tell him he couldn't howl. So what I'm telling you is she's going to understand different things from us. I don't know what she's going to understand. She may look at you and go, oh yeah, and run out the door. And if she starts calming down, we're going to keep it going. But wolves, it's a sound. And I just had some folks come up. They were in the city. They'd spent all their time very stressed out, and they got to have a chance in nature. And when the wolves started howling, you watch the tears go. You watch it hit people gutturally. And it's a sound that's really missing. So here's how we do it. Do we have any musicians in the audience?
I know.
Oh, come on. There's got to be a couple music people out here. We want the key of E. Bring it up soft. Hold it, get as high as you can, and then taper off one note. If you look at her while you're howling, she knows you're faking it. Wolves don't look at each other when they howl. They throw their head back, they push with their diaphragm, and we're going to try 3 to 5 howls. If I bring my hand up, I want you guys to howl, and if I bring my hand down, we'll start getting it quiet. But you guys want to try it?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see if we can get her to sing with us. Start really softly, just join me. Oh. Little louder.
Oh.
Louder.
Oh.
2 more. One last try. She started moving her mouth. I think she thinks about it, but I'm going to suggest you guys might need a little more practice. You guys have made this room so comfortable. I thank you so much. It's been a great job, and we're just going to let our friend walk on out the door. She's got her own van. We're going to try to let her get back to her vehicle before we all stand and jump up. So we're going to hold our applause till she gets out of the room.
Wonderful. And Mike and Moira, thank you so much for your help and for bringing the wolf and spending some time with us. We really appreciate it.
Nice job, you guys. This is what you find is we bring him into the room. She knows she's center of attention. You guys get that sense. And again, we haven't trained her. And this is what was so fun, Joanna, was taking true wolves into Yellowstone. Because do you know who's most afraid of wolves? This is fascinating. Ranchers and wolf biologists. It's amazing. We walked the wolf into Yellowstone. Every biologist was like, but you know what they spend all day watching? Wolves doing what? Hunting elk. Once they got that eye in their face, you see it calm. But again, we're here to hopefully inspire people to keep wild wild. So protecting our habitat, I think that's the best thing we can all do in this world.
So as we wrap up, let me ask just 1 or 2 other questions. Joanna, you've been there for some of these wolf reintroductions.
Indeed.
Right? And what I hear you saying, Kent, is that these animals, they learn how to be wild animals from other wild animals, and that there's a natural... What happens, what's that like? Walk me through what it's like to be there and watch a wolf reintroduced in the wild.
Oh, man. I've been sort of in the trenches of conservation biology field work for almost 40 years. And, you know, the moments of success are few and far between. There was nothing more unequivocal in my entire career after working for years and years and years on rewilding Western Colorado with gray wolves, nothing more unequivocal than the sound of the crate door opening And that first paw on the ground, man, it literally, you know how you hear, oh, I lost my breath. Oh, I was left breathless. The breath was pulled from my lungs. It was extraordinary. You could have heard a pin drop. All you heard was the sound of the animal and the crate, which was closer than this table here. It was extraordinary. And it's those moments, right, that someone that is working in the world of just trying to make a difference, it's those moments that make it happen.
And what really got me is my wife was on the ground and released the Nez Perce pack in Yellowstone. We watched some of this, and we learned that when we put the wolves in a big fenced enclosure, soft release, they were afraid to go out the gates. It's absolutely what we had to learn. But the biggest epiphany for me was not only being able to go to Yellowstone and see wolves, but I'm in New York City. I'm at a public school. Have you ever tried to get 1,000 kids quiet in a New York City school? It doesn't work until guess who walks in? The wolf. And then you ask them, have you ever sat this quiet? And they're like, And I'm like, how many of you ever seen a deer? And they're like, huh? We have kids today so deprived from nature they don't know how to sit still. But one kid in the back of the room, he lifts his hand up and he goes, hey, mister, I saw a wolf. And I'm like, yeah, right, you saw a wolf. And I looked at him and I'm like, where did you see a wolf? He's like, Yellowstone. And I'm like, you got to go to Yellowstone? Oh, the kids were so jealous in New York that this kid went out. And then I'm asked, how did you get to see a wolf? Because this is 96. You could hardly see a wolf. He found a guy in a yellow Xterra sitting on the side of the road. You know who I'm talking about, Rick McIntyre. That one person, he sets out his 2 scopes. We have thousands of people all over the country that drove down the road, stopped out, and he puts you in a scope to see a wolf. That is what got me, was to have kids see a wolf in the wild. That was impossible when I was a kid. So it's happening, folks. We have wolves worldwide. They've come across to European states. We started Mission Wolf with wolves in 2 states. We have over 18 states with wolf populations today. So I think we're on a good track, but we got a lot of work to do.
Well, I want to thank all of you and thank you, the audience, for participating and being let's give everyone a round of applause. This has been such a wonderful experience. Please tell your friends about it. Please feel free to follow up with Kent and Mission Wolf and Joanna and your work, and to a world with more wolves. Thank you all so much.
Folks.
Thank you, everybody.